Hey, good morning, Choice Residential. Hope your day is off to a great start as always. So today I want to talk about what happens when you encounter an unrepresented buyer on one of your listings. So oftentimes if a buyer shows up or contacts you and they get to the point that they want to make an offer and they don't have an agent, you kind of have two options at that point. Well, really three, right? So the first option is you could tell that agent, that buyer, and say, okay, you got to go out and get your own agent, right? You should have an agent be represented. Option number two is that you could say, okay, Mr. Buyer, I'm going to recommend you to an agent in my firm. They can represent you as a designated dual agent so that you can have representation and I'll represent the seller. Now, in either of those cases, it's good to make those recommendations so that it's clear to the buyer that they have an option to have an agent representing them. But in some cases, that buyer will say, no, I don't want an agent. I want to do it myself. And so sometimes the inclination then of that listing agent is to say, okay, well, I'll be a dual agent then. Okay, so you don't want to have a separate agent. That's fine. I offered you that opportunity. I did it through email, so I documented it in writing. You know you can have another agent that represents your best interest, but you're choosing not to. So I'll be a dual agent and represent both of you, which, of course, when you're a dual agent, you're a facilitator of the transaction. You don't really represent either one of them anymore. So sometimes that's the path that an agent will go. But the only reason to do that is because you don't realize that there's an unrepresented buyer option. And so that buyer doesn't need to have actual representation. There's no reason for you to be a dual agent. If the agent or the buyer says that they don't want an agent, all you have to do is get them to sign the Working with Real Estate Agents brochure. And at the bottom of page 4, if you use the printed version, or on the back of it, if you use the actual brochure, there's a checkbox that says buyer acknowledges that agent represents the seller in this transaction. So you would check that and have the buyer initial there. And that's the only paperwork you need to show that that buyer is unrepresented and that you've disclosed the fact that you represent the seller. So there's really no reason to put yourself in a dual agent situation when a buyer has said that they don't want an agent representing them. Now, what I would suggest is that if a buyer says, no, I want you to represent me, I want you to be a dual agent, I would go back to that buyer and say, I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, that's not how I operate. I can recommend you to an agent in my office. Or I can help you through the transaction as an unrepresented buyer. But by going into dual agency, you now eliminate your ability to fully represent your seller. For the sake of a buyer who has said they don't want another agent, there's no reason to put yourself in that dual agency situation. Now, as it pertains to the commission that you're earning on the transaction, remember, you have given the seller a holistic fee that they're paying you. So whether it's 4%, 5%, 6%, 10%, whatever it is, and then you are agreeing to split that with cooperating buyer agents. But if there's no other cooperating buyer agent, you're still entitled to that full fee that you were charging. So if it was 6%, you're still getting paid 6%. Now, you may have some agreement with the seller that if you're the only agent involved in the transaction, maybe the commission drops 1% or whatever that arrangement may be. But that doesn't mean you have to be a dual agent. It just means that you're the only agent in the transaction. So again, there's not a whole lot of situations where a buyer says, no, I don't want to have another agent representing me, where you should actually be representing them as a dual agent. You should just continue representing the seller and then assist that buyer in the transaction as an unrepresented buyer. So you're not advising them. You're just filling out the paperwork on their behalf, allowing them to sign it. If they ask for recommendations on home inspectors and attorneys, you don't really want to give them any recommendations there. You just let them know what their options are. Yes, you can hire a licensed North Carolina home inspector, and you should hire a licensed North Carolina attorney to handle the closing. You could make some recommendations, but you certainly wouldn't want to give them one name. At a minimum, you'd want to give them 3 names and encourage them to not only research those 3 names, but research any other choices that they might want to select. So, as I'm sure you know, dual agency can be really tricky and increase liability for you and for the firm. So if you run into these situations and you want to chat through it, please give me a call. Just wanted to let you know that there is absolutely an opportunity to represent a buyer as an unrepresented buyer. So you're not really representing them, but to assist them as an unrepresented buyer. And that's the best way to handle it when a buyer tells you that they don't want another agent. So if you have any questions, reach out, give me a call. Hope you guys have a great day. Talk to you soon.